Should I just upload my, I'll just upload my PPT then, yeah? I'll just, yeah, I'll just share my screen. You know, I won't. Okay. Can you see my PPT? Yeah, you can see it. Excellent. Okay, so let's pretty much begin then. Hi. You can hear me, I presume. Yeah. Okay. So some of you who were here maybe 3 years ago might remember me giving a PD session on a technique for teaching pronunciation. And I'm going to talk about that again today, but this time, after reviewing the technique briefly, just for those people who are not familiar with it, I'll then move on to a survey which I conducted at the end of 2019, early 2020, just before COVID hit, with a number of students, where I basically tried to find out, you know, what they thought about it. I think you can probably do without looking at me. I don't know how to look at me without seeing anyone else as well. But anyway, it doesn't matter. And then we'll have a question answer session at the end. Okay. Okay, so what I want to do now is think about the challenges that we face together teaching pronunciation, as opposed to other aspects of English, including not just other aspects of speaking, but other aspects of English language teaching. So what I thought I could do is I'm going to put a whiteboard link, okay, in the chat. Here's a whiteboard link. If you can click on that, then you'll go to you should go to what challenges do we face in teaching pronunciation as opposed to other aspects of English. Okay, and if you scroll down, you'll see what thoughts do you have in general about the technique and how you might use it. So that's something for you to fill out at any time during today's session. Okay, if you don't know how to use the whiteboard, there's an ABC text button. You just need to click there, and then you can start writing. So I just want to. There you go. Okay. So, yeah, can anyone type, what challenges do we face in teaching pronunciation as opposed to other aspects of English? A loss of face for learners, anything else? Not in the curriculum. That's a good point, Garth. Yeah? Yeah, you can also point in the public chat. So that would imply a lack of time. Lack of time in our classes because it hasn't been set aside within the curriculum. I guess that's what you mean. Difficult for learners to make changes to their pronunciation. Why would it be difficult? Something to consider. Loss of face, yeah, you definitely get that. That's similar to the whole reluctance about putting your hand up and giving answers as well, isn't it? So what do students prioritize? They probably do prioritize other things, I guess, but you'd be surprised. We might be surprised the extent to which students want pronunciation instruction. Is anyone actually typing but not able to be seen because of these circles moving around? I'm not quite sure what they mean. It may be connected to how much the students identify it. That's a good point. Yeah. To what extent, like maybe they want to speak like an English speaker or an American speaker. I certainly find that people who like watching Hollywood films, TV films, they tend to have the best pronunciation, in my experience, just through exposure. Okay, time will probably go quicker than I imagined, but you can continue to write here, or indeed, if you look down at the bottom, you'll see what thoughts do you have in general about the technique and how you might use it. So just when you find out about the technique more, then you can write some more ideas here. And then, can you type in the public chat? Can students reflect on feedback given on their pronunciation as easily as they can on teacher feedback on their writing? So particularly, like, you've given feedback to the student, can they reflect on it as easily as they can on teacher feedback on their writing, through an error correction code or through, writing written comments about their performance? And secondly, can they take away from a pronunciation class a record of their errors and the improvements that they have made for later reflection? So sort of, can you type there in the public chat, like yes or no for both those questions? No and yes. So how do they take away a record of their errors and improvements for later reflection? Huali, I'm just curious. You don't have to tell me. You don't have to turn on your camera and speak now, but maybe you can write in the the whiteboard what that might be. I mean, I guess unless the student is, I mean, things have changed since COVID, because now, in a sense, everything is recorded through BBB and HiFlex and stuff. So it's true that there may be a record now that in a way that there wasn't 2 years ago. But otherwise, I would say generally no and no. Okay. And that, I would say, and I would suggest is a problem, or at least a characteristic of teaching pronunciation. And so someone else has written something. They may be corrected, but probably do not get a record of this correction and explain why they are making it. Yeah, an explanation of why they're making it is certainly also very important. I wonder whether that's, yep, that's something that's also something that that they would need. Okay, but there's a sense in which is that to do with the teaching of pronunciation or the correction of pronunciation? Because anyway, it's not so directly related to this technique. But anyway, so my understanding of teaching pronunciation in different contexts, and the problems with it as it is currently undertaken, kind of can be characterized in 2 ways in relation to the 2 different ways that you can teach pronunciation. So you can teach it live and you can teach it asynchronously. And if you teach it live, you can do it either on site or you can do it online. But even whichever way, so a good thing is you can give interactive and immediate feedback, but it's very difficult for the students to take a record away with them. And the teacher can kind of interrupt the speaker at the moment to give them specific immediate feedback before they forget, which is good. That's another thing that's part of the immediate feedback. But I would say, so what you have then is you have interaction without a record, yeah? And the other way is both online and asynchronous. So there's there's no contact in space or time. It's you know, for example, a student makes a file, sends it to the teacher. The teacher looks at it, listens to it, edits it, comments on it, and sends it back. Okay, I'll get your question a bit later. And that way you would have a record of feedback on the student's recorded speech that the student could keep. And also the student won't be interrupted. I'm kind of presuming that interrupting a student in the middle of their speech is a bad thing. So the characteristic of online and asynchronous would give close, very specific feedback about specific problems. But again, no face-to-face interaction or possibilities for live correction or modeling. So you would have a record without interaction. Okay, so that's how I characterize the field at the moment of different teaching possibilities. So if we were considering that to be a problem, in that you would want interaction with a record, what then might a solution look like? What could a solution to this look like? Well, it would be a solution that would be focused on the very specific, both segmental and supersegmental issues. Segmental would be, for example, particular phonemes. Supersegmental would be intonation across a clause, and would avoid generalities. You know, it would be able to give very specific examples and point very directly. It would also be interactive and immediately given. The feedback would be interactive and immediately given, but would also leave the student with a record that they could take away with them, and in addition, ideally would not interrupt the speaker in the actual flow as they were speaking. Okay, so that's what I would consider to be a solution to the problems of there not being a record, interaction with a record. Okay, so I came up with a technique which I think provides such a solution, and it involves two mobile phones with voice recorders, and it has various different stages. So the first staging would be the reading. Okay, so the teacher would send a student a specific level-specific text and ask them to prepare how they would pronounce it. When the student arrived, the teacher would explain the systems of notations, which I'll show you in a moment. The student would read out the text, and that would be recorded on both phones, the teacher's phone and the student's phone. So as the student speaks, the teacher makes appropriate notations on their own paper copy of the text. I mean, it could conceivably not be paper, but I think since both devices are being used for the recording, it might be easier to use paper, but you wouldn't necessarily need to. So these of course can be adapted by any teacher, but the simple notations could be like an underlining for a phonetic issue, or the idea that you need a stronger stress, double underscore for even stronger stress. An undulating line might indicate fluency issues, a diagonal dash or double dash for a need for a pause or longer pauses, parentheses for subordinate clauses that would need to be spoken at a different pace or in a different tone, a diagonal arrow like that for a missing word, or a cross out dash for an unnecessary word. Okay, and then at the end of the reading, the teacher would stop their recording, and the student would continue to record on their phone. The teacher would then show the student their annotated text, which they had written, and the teacher would play back the recording and pause the audio at appropriate moments to comment on student errors and model improvements. The teacher may also notice new issues on this second listening and intervene or mark these on the text as appropriate. Okay, that's as it's being played back. And then the second reading would be stage 3. Here the student would read out the text again, this time from the teacher's copy of the text, and the teacher would listen for improvements and give encouragement and praise after the student finishes. The teacher may also comment again during the second reading as appropriate, because it's also being recorded. So although it's an interruption that's not the primary interruption, and it contributes to further layer of feedback. And then stage 4 would be self-study. So the student would leave the consultation with the teacher's paper copy of the text and 3 audio texts combined into one sound file on their phone, by which I mean their original recording, the feedback session for the future reference, and their second improved version. And that's all combined into one sound file. Okay, so I want to demonstrate this a bit, how this works. Now, hopefully, I'm going to play it here, and I did check it yesterday. Hopefully, it's going to share. If I share computer sound, I think that you will be able to hear me when I play these videos. Now, it's possible that that won't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a box link, okay, in the public chat. And if you go to the box link, you will see, you can find the recordings to play on your own, okay? But as of now, I'm about to play these 5 brief recordings, okay? The reading overall feedback, the playback with example corrections, the second reading, and the self-study, okay? So here's the first reading, and okay. So this is just the introduction.
I'm going to ask you to read it. Hopefully you've prepared this.
Yeah.
So I want you to read it as best you can. Think about intonation, stress, pausing, phonemes. Don't panic. And as you write, I'm going to make notes on this piece of paper.
Okay.
And afterwards, we'll play back your recording on my phone, and you'll still record everything on yours.
Okay.
We'll talk about and model improvements on mistakes you make, and afterwards you can say it again.
Okay.
Okay. So if you can start speaking now, please.
How easy do you find it to improve your English? If you're like many students, you'll find it difficult and you'll be wondering what you can do about it and who.
Okay, so that's the, hopefully that worked. If it didn't work, please can you play it on your own on some separate device. And then we have the overall feedback. Let me just check that that worked with everyone, or at least with some of you.
That was fine.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so let's carry on. So this is, they've just finished speaking, so they'll just be finishing as it begins.
Use your recorder in class.
Good. Do you watch a lot of TV?
Yeah.
In English?
Yeah.
American?
American and British.
You've watched a lot, haven't you? And you've learned from it. I can tell. Like, your pronunciation is really interesting because your intonation and your energy is really good. Like, it's a nice spirit. It's a nice energy within your pronunciation. But you have some issues, But they're not problems of comprehension. But there'll never be a problem with people not understanding what you're saying. It's more of a question of just unusual articulation of certain phonemes. So we can go through that.
Okay, and then we can have the actual interventions in the playback, stage 2.
Understanding.
Okay. Understanding.
Let me just, I'll flag up the, so this would be the kind of thing on the screen now, an extract of the kind of feedback that I've given with the underlining of the vowels and the fluency issue towards the end. And obviously you can focus on different aspects of speech. And you'll notice that I didn't talk about if you are keen. I think I had mentioned that type of problem earlier in the text. And in any case, you can kind of focus on certain things. So let's play that.
Yeah.
Many of which can be a lot of fun.
Fun. So there's slight issues with your vowels. Yeah, fun.
Can you think what any of this might be?
So that was you said, well, any of those. So these. Yeah.
If you are keen to improve your English or any other second language for that matter, consider some of these handy tips to get you on your way.
Now that's good, but this is a little bit staccato, do you know? So maybe some of these handy tips to get, some of these handy tips to get you on your way, like 2 movements. Some of these handy tips. Say it like that.
Some of these handy tips to get you on your way.
Not you.
Okay, and then the second reading, which now she will be saying it again, and I'll be intervening at certain places to correct again. All the while, this is of course being recorded.
Always get permission from your teacher to use your recorder in class.
Use your recorder in class. So more fluency. Use your recorder in class. Okay. So let's hear you say it again. Keep this recording. Don't turn it off. It is recording still.
Oh yeah.
Good. Otherwise it defeats the whole purpose. We'd have to do it again. Okay.
How easy do you find it to improve your English? If you're like many students, you'll find it difficult and you will be wondering what you can do about it and who can help. Perhaps you feel that you should attend more classes but don't have the time in your schedule. Luckily, learning English doesn't have to mean only sitting in the classroom and studying difficult grammar. In fact, English language teachers will encourage you to do plenty of extra learning on your own time.
Yeah.
There are a number of ways to improve your understanding of the language, many of which can be a lot of fun. Can you think what?
Okay, and then finally would be like what I would say at the end.
Make sure, however, that you always get permission from your teacher to use your recorder in class.
So something you say, permission.
Permission.
Good. Okay, so I hope that was useful in some way.
Yeah.
So what I want you to do now, it hasn't finished, we were finished today, just keep that recording just in case you forget the instructions. So ideally, if you could listen to that whole file 3 times in the next week, while looking at this text and remembering the areas. I haven't told you which kind of mistake it is because it would be take too long, but I explain it, don't I? So in combination between listening and reading the text, you can remind yourself of the recurring mistakes you make, and also listen to your own improvement and see how that has worked. And hopefully you'll become more aware of the mistakes you make and how you can get better as a speaker. And then I'm going to send you a questionnaire, short 11 questions, take you 10.
Okay, so I'll explain that last bit in a moment. Okay, so we'll carry on. So the question then was to ask myself, what do students actually think of this technique? And so I circulated a 10-question survey to 41 students after I conducted one-to-one sessions like that with them at the end of 2019. And I chose foundation, standard, advanced, and postgraduate students because I wanted to know whether the effectiveness and usefulness, or the perception of the effectiveness and usefulness, varied between language level. So I chose 3 texts, each correlated with B1, B2, and C1. I found them using the Flesch-Kincaid readability scores. And I sent those to students about 2 or 3 days in advance of the workshop, and those texts are in the box folder. I asked the students to familiarize themselves with the text and to consider how they would best recite it, considering phonemes, intonation, pacing, pauses, and stress. But I gave them no model. They were then they would then ask to attend the workshop with a copy of the text and a smartphone with voice recorder. So when that session, which we've just demonstrated, after that session was finished, as you heard, I asked students to re-listen to the audio file at least 3 times and then reflect on their recurring difficulties as identified and consider how their second reading was an improvement on their first. Then students, as you heard, were told they would receive an anonymous survey that I asked them to complete. So what was I trying to discover in my survey? Whether students had been taught pronunciation in this way in the past and how comfortable they felt with and engaged by this process. How and in what ways they found the technique effective and in what ways they might wish to see it improved. And finally, whether or not and in what ways, including self-study applications, they should like this technique introduced at XJTLU. So I chose 10 questions. These first 4 questions. Have you ever been taught pronunciation in this way before? Did you feel comfortable listening to your own voice? How many times did you re-listen? And how useful did you find this technique? And then what aspect of the procedure did you find most and least useful? Can you think of any ways in which the technique could be improved? Would you like this technique to be made available as a part of your English language education at XJTLU? If so, if not, why? Would you like this technique incorporated into the syllabus, even if it meant less time could be devoted to class to other areas of language teaching? And do you think you might use this technique with other students on their own as a part of your own self-study? Certain of these questions I would reframe now in retrospect if I was to do the survey again, perhaps giving more specific options and choices for them to select between in multiple choice. Although it was also instructive to not give them any guidance in that way and just to let them express themselves in their own language. So there's advantages both ways. Okay, so what were the results? So I sent it out to 41 students and I got 33 replies. So 80% response rate, which was adequate. I mean, obviously 41 students is not an ideal number, but it was a very intensive process to run that in those individual sessions with 41 students. So I'd wanted at least 10 responses for each of the 3 year 1 levels and at least 5 from postgraduate. And I received, this is what I received. So I got a good response from standard and advanced and less impressive from foundation. But every person I did the survey with in postgraduate replied, which was great. So in comparing the different responses, I'll use percentages because there were different numbers for those 4 categories. And the questions can be categorized in 3 broad areas, I would say. So familiarity, comfort, and self-study engagement, effectiveness and scope for improvement, and application of technique at XJTLU, and the possibilities for self-study. Questions 8 to 10. Okay, so familiarity, comfort, and engagement. Have you ever been taught pronunciation in this way before? So all responses, amongst all the students, 82% of them said no, they had not. So that's quite encouraging if the argument for introducing is it's a novelty, it's innovative, it's original, it's a new experience. And that's particularly the case with year 1 responses, and less so with postgraduate responses. Although, of course, the question was not ideal because it's unclear if they are only thinking about the use of 2 voice recorders simultaneously or whether they're also talking about my specific procedure. So in this way before, could have been more clearly defined. But in any case, postgraduate students seem to be more familiar than year 1 students. Did you feel comfortable listening to your own voice in combination with my own? Who was freaked out by it, basically? Because I remember sometimes people are uncomfortable listening to their own voice. So they've never heard it before, they haven't heard it often before. So, so did you feel comfortable? So most people did feel comfortable, which was good. Either straightforwardly yes, 68%, or tentatively yes. Some people were uncertain, and about 15% were uncomfortable or just simply uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, I presume. So advanced students seem to be the most comfortable, and foundation students significantly less comfortable in being engaged in this process, suggesting that students who lack confidence and experience may be the least comfortable with this technique. I guess confidence more than experience there, but again, this sort of sense of loss of face and lack of confidence about language would be more marked, I presume, amongst foundation level students than advanced students. So how many times did you re-listen to the audio file that you left the consultation with? I had suggested at least 3 times. So the average number was 3.81, which was very encouraging, especially since I originally thought in terms of 2 to 3 times. And then I changed it at the last moment. So yeah, most enthusiastic re-listeners were foundation and standard, so the lower levels, which is sort of different, wasn't it, than the shyness of their reluctance to feel comfortable, as it were, face to face. They were kind of then more enthusiastic self-study. the least enthusiastic postgraduates, and two advanced students kind of skewed the statistics because they were really into it, as you can see. So encouraging levels of engagement, and in general higher levels of engagement amongst lower level students when using the process alone. Okay, effectiveness and scope for improvement. On a scale of 1 to 10, how useful did you find this technique? 1 is the least useful, 10 the most useful. So total score for all 7.55, and quite consistent results throughout there, despite the variation we've seen earlier. Again, foundation students are quite comfortable in certain contexts, and postgraduate students less so, although not as significantly less enthusiastic than in relation to other questions. 5, what aspect of the technique did you find most useful? Only one aspect requested, and I didn't give them any options. So unsurprisingly, some answers were vague and non-specific, especially from foundation students, and not particularly useful. The most common thing that was said was that the technique helped students re-listen to their voice after the session, and or helped them become more aware of their own mistakes. So that was mentioned by 71% of students overall, including 88% standard down to 50% postgraduate. Of course, it wasn't always clear if by this they meant that it was help them become more aware of their mistakes because of the re-listening, or because of the actual live session itself, or both. So to what extent the re-listening had a role in that is not clear, but it's still quite encouraging. Postgraduate students are now definitely emerging as the least engaged or impressed with the technique as a whole compared to year 1 students. What aspect of the technique did you find least useful? Only one aspect requested, but again, no options given. So I'm not giving many clues about what to think about, which perhaps was a mistake if I was to do this again. No aspect mentioned at all. So 80% of all students were, as it were, impressed with everything, or didn't find anything unimpressive, although I'm not sure how much they thought about it, to be honest. So the degree of satisfaction, as it were, 90% foundation, and not pretty similar for all. A couple of standard level students brought down their score because they weren't always clear about the differences between their own mistakes and my modeled improvement, which is a bit worrying, but that was only from 2 students. 2 advanced students found the technique time consuming, the second mentioning that meant the re-listening, because I would say that the actual 20-minute session is a pretty effective and efficient use of time myself, but I think maybe both of them were talking about the re-listening, which, yeah, it does take up time. Can you think of any ways in which the technique could be improved? So lots of different degrees of engagement. So for example, 87% of advanced students had something to say. Foundation students, only 25% had something to say. So again, the shyness perhaps of the foundation students coming through there. Most common suggestion was not actually to take anything from the technique, but to put more into it. So more materials, which isn't defined. You could link it to the phonetic table, which is possible. I could focus more on intonation. Pronunciation could have been taught beforehand. That's not actually the purpose of the technique as I devised it, but sure, that's possible. The teacher could have rechecked the improvements after 1 week. Yeah, possible, time permitting. The technique could be used to teach pronunciation from the outset. The whole technique itself could be used to teach pronunciation. Not viable in a class setting. That's what I would say there. Also, 4 higher level students said that the teacher could give a demonstration reading beforehand. That is certainly possible. That is certainly a way it could be adapted. So the students were keen to suggest additions but not subtractions from the technique, especially at the higher levels. And additions sound good to me. It means it's adaptable. Would you like the technique to be made available as part of your English language education? If so, yes. If so, why? If not, why? So all of the foundation, standard, and advanced students said yes without reservation. 2 advanced students were undecided, and 1 would not like it used. So those who were in favor of it being used, why? 31% didn't give a reason. The most common reason given was that Chinese students do not receive enough help with pronunciation or receive little to no help at high school. As for the undecided advanced students, 1 said it should be used with an app. Yeah, well, that's possible. I'm not an app developer, however. 2 time consuming for class, better for self-study. Well, I agree, totally. At least it's best, in my opinion, to be used in workshops with CS. So that enthusiasm wanes, however, if it means that less time could be devoted to other areas of language teaching, as asked in question 9. So if that was the case, that less time would be devoted to other areas, 62% of foundation students would still be keen, standard 55, postgraduates 80. Attitude of advanced students unchanged. So as for the lesser enthusiasm, it's because, also interestingly, students think that the technique is better used in the student's own time and hopefully with the involvement of a teacher. So strong expression of interest in its usage at XJTLU, especially if it does not impact normal class time practices. And then kind of related to that point, do you think you might use this technique with other students as a part of your own self-study? I did not actually design it with that peer-to-peer intention in mind, and I've always been skeptical about the possibilities there. So do you think you might use this technique in such a way, advanced? So most people say yes. There's a belief that students can profitably learn from one another and give valuable feedback. As for the reservations, an advanced student would prefer to be partnered with an international student. Others feared their English competence meant they could not correctly identify mistakes, or they wanted to be with a native speaker. So that kind of, I find that interesting because although I kind of am very skeptical about using it in class, peer-to-peer, noise pollution being one problem, but also the lack of expertise and the way that they could actually refortify one another's errors or teach people new errors. I can see that they are nonetheless keen, by and large, to use it to some extent in a peer-to-peer way. But PG students are less likely to engage. And there are still students who share my reservation about its use with non-native speakers. So general conclusions, most students, especially year 1, have never been taught in this way before. Most students felt it helped them become aware of their voice and reflect on their mistakes. Almost all students want it to be introduced in XJTLU, especially if it involved a native speaker or non-class setting, in a non-class setting. Foundation and standard students are more reluctant in its uptake. They tend to also find it the most useful and be most engaged in self-study. Students see potential for its adaptation to particular needs and purposes because they suggest it's in so many different ways in which it could be adapted. Okay, so that is pretty much the timing I was hoping for. Wow. I realized I had a lot to get through, so I went quite fast, but I think the timing was about right. Does anyone have any questions? I hope that any questions? I hope you were able to hear me. Have I thought about how this might be integrated into a course? Yeah, I was talking to Catherine about that. I mean, I think that because of its one-to-one dynamic and because of pressures teachers that I think kind of reading week, or if there was a week set aside for one-to-one sessions, then it could be incorporated into a week, you know, leading up to the speaking exam. But I don't see how it. I'm not sure how it could be integrated into normal standard class time. Do you have any ideas? And I wouldn't want it to be, because I mean. Any other questions? We had 3 writing courses. Yeah. I haven't. No, I haven't looked into the cognitive view of pronunciation. That's really interesting. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it could be generalized and used in a number of ways. I mean, I'm talking, but the way I'm thinking at the moment is well, two options. One is to offer it in the context of continuing support one-to-one optional workshops, and the other is I'm working with Darlene about creating model interactive sessions which will be filmed, and then the recordings of those sessions could be used. The students can reflect on and analyze, and the questions will be asked about them, and it will be testing them in a kind of online class environment. But it's always supposed to be quite dynamic and time intensive, a sort of surgery encounter between a teacher or an international student and a student in that focused one-to-one way. So yeah, I think it would always have to be as an extra to a standard EAP class, unless certain blocks of time within the syllabus were set aside for it. But I doubt, being realistic, I doubt that would be viable. But I would say that, you know, there's a lot of interest in more teaching of pronunciation in general in the feedback. I can see it being integrated as awareness raising as a class, script exploitation, peer review of recordings. Yeah, definitely. Yep. I mean, I guess when I say I couldn't see it being integrated into an EAP syllabus, I meant during class time in the current form that it exists. But sure, recordings of the technique could then be exploited and adapted and used as material for reflection, for self-study. Or even during class, if you're teaching pronunciation, you could play a video of an interactive session and get people to listen out for the types of mistakes being made and identify them. If you want to write anything at all about your ideas on that whiteboard, I'd really appreciate that, because I'll save that and I'll have that to take away. And or of course in the, I don't think this is being recorded. Was I supposed to turn on the recording? I thought somebody else would have done that, but I also forgot. Oh, it is recording. Oh, all right. Okay, well, that's good. I can't see that. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Unless anyone has any other questions. Heaven forbid that anyone might want to turn on their microphone. But that's fine. That's fine. So I'll leave that box link there if you want to access. You'll also find in the box link, if you're interested, the different texts and also the survey tool, which will talk about the actual ethical the research proposal that I put to the ethics committee. Hi, someone turned on their mic. Yeah, so you'll see here in the box link, you'll see the interview script, the questionnaire, 3 separate texts, foundation, easier, the standard one, which you heard an extract from, and then the advanced and postgraduate text. If anyone's interested in listening to some of the full-length sessions, I can share them. But I've got permission to do that from about 5 or 6 students. And if you know of anyone who would like to benefit from this technique, like a student who's struggling in particular, you could recommend it to them. I'm talking to Bruce at the moment about how. What happened? Did it end? I guess it did. Okay. Wow, I don't really know what happened.